up until this point, we've been pretty good about going chapter by chapter, right? This lesson wants us to cover chapters 12 through 19. That's a lot, right? Through this. So we won't read every single verse of every single chapter within this. We will, this is kind of a bit of an overview, I guess, of what is essentially happening here as the Israelites and Joshua continue to remain faithful in their faithfulness that's going on. Perfect. Probably a decade ago. Maybe a little more. I think. I can't pinpoint the exact time. But the University of Kentucky, no, didn't mean to say that. University of Connecticut women's basketball team, right? Led by Coach Gino Ariani something, I don't know exactly what it is. But had people like Diana Taurasi come through, had a lot of really good basketball players. And they went for a period of time over, I don't remember the exact number of years, but they won like 90 straight games during a couple year span. Consecutive national championships, never lost, like undefeated through 90 straight games, which is pretty incredible if you think about something, a winning streak essentially lasting that long, right? And usually when sports teams are on those types of runs, right, there's tons of pressure and press around them, and they talk about it all the time, and it's pretty incredible that and it's a bit, again, of a testimony of the dedication, right, of the coach and the staff of the coach and the players as well, because you know that as that streak continues to get harder and harder to keep, right? A pretty credible testimony that's built on winning principles and then ran by very capable people. Now, suppose that your favorite sports team, or a sports team that you were following, if you don't like sports, that up until like you were watching them perform, right, or play or whatever, and that sports team that you like or that were following, let's say that they had 31 consecutive wins and no defeats, right? 31 in a row, no defeats. What would your confidence level be in that team that has won 31 straight games? Pretty good, right? Feeling pretty good about them. How confident would you be that they would never lose again? Probably not as confident, right? But at some point, we all know that what it's going to happen at some point, right? Hope it doesn't. Doesn't seem like it's going to, but we know that at some point a loss is coming. Joshua here, undefeated in his fights with the enemies in the Promised Land, going 31-0, right? 31 straight battles that Joshua and the Israelites won. He lost a battle against Ai, we know, right? Initially, but eventually defeated them in the end, and that's what kept the streak alive. His record, right, 31-0, says more about God than it does about Joshua. But God is going to use this winning streak, I guess a good way to put it, going to use this winning streak to encourage Israel to continue to have enough faith in Him to take the Promised Land over, that they had not yet conquered. So up till chapter 12, or 11, excuse me, we've seen them conquer the southern region, right? A large portion of the northern region as well. But there's still some areas there they haven't gotten yet. Canaan's a big area. It's a lot of land. So God's lesson here in these chapters of Joshua, as we see, kind of challenges Israel to remain faithful, and as we kind of hop, skip, jump our way through these chapters, we'll kind of see that take place. Okay. Has there been a time in your life in which you've received a motivating or stirring speech? Can you think back of a time in which you have been motivated or stirred in some way, encouraged in some way by a speech? Did it ever happen to you? Can you think about one in your mind? Can you picture or remember one? Right? If you can, right? And I've got a couple of those that I always go back to when I think about certain things. What made the speech motivating to you? It's relevant. Okay. What else? It's encouraging. Anything else? It's exciting, right? It's exciting. I mean, you're kind of being a teenager and you're ready to go perform in sport or whatever, play whatever, and coach come in and have some kind of speech or have some whatever in, feel like we're running through a brick wall, right? It doesn't matter what's in front. Nothing's going to stop us, right? That's kind of the purpose of a speech that is motivating and encouraging. Now, some of those motivating, encouraging speeches can lead to a heightened emotion. And a lot of times, after the heightened emotion, what happens? There's a crash, right? And then there's not a good performance behind that, right? But they're really good. Encouraging, motivating speeches or motivating orators are able to blend both a bit of an emotional raise with also an encouraging understanding of the task that is ahead, right? And then confidence building of being able to conquer the task. Joshua here, before that, what would you put if you were the person speaking to the children of Israel, if you were trying to motivate the children of Israel to finish the conquering here of the Promised Land? What are some of the things you would say to motivate them?
God is on our side.
God is on our side. Yes. And then probably follow up with some previous accounts of what God has done, right? Hailstorms, Red Sea, Jordan River stopping, walls falling down. They have seen evidence, physical evidence of Him literally helping them, like He said He would, right? Joshua was encouraging the Israelites here to keep moving forward to conquer Canaan. And the faithfulness, God's faithfulness to them, and in turn their faithfulness to Him, should have been and is and was the motivating factor for their obedience, right? Because of the things they've seen happen. All right, let's go to the first 6 verses of Joshua chapter 12. And we'll see who these kings. This is a message of victory in the first 6 verses here in Joshua. And 2 reasons that we're going to see here because of this victory. Now, these are the kings of the land which the children of Israel smote, possessed their land on the other side, Jordan, toward the rising of the sun, from the river Arnon unto the Mount Hermon, and all the plains into the east. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and ruled from Aroer, which is upon the bank of the river, Arnon, in the middle of the river, and from half Gilead, even unto the river Jabbok, which is the border of the children of Ammon, and from the plain to the sea of Chinneroth, on the east, into the sea of the plain, even the salt sea on the east, the way to Beth Jeshemoth, and from the south under Ashdoth Pisgah, and the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt in Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and reigned in Mount Hermon, and in Salcah, and in all of Bashan, and unto the border of the Geshurites, and the Maacathites, and half Gilead, the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Them did Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel spy. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave it for a possession unto the Reubenites and the Gadites in the half tribe of Manasseh. So Joshua here starts with victory message that reminds the Israelites of what God has already done through Moses in the conquering of these kings. Now there are two reasons here that is included in this. First of all, this kind of becomes of Moses' victory. Joshua's using these as a highlight, right? A highlight reel of what God has done to help continue to make the connection of Moses and Joshua. Right? To show that God is helping both conquer. Secondly, the two things that, or two reasons Joshua uses this, is that these victories, right, the Mosaic victories, reminds the reader, us, as well as the Israelites who's hearing this, it reminds them that God who carried the children of Israel through the desert wanderings is the same God who delivers them into the promised land and helps them conquer over their enemies. All right, delivers that into their hands. We get two specific narratives here in verses 2 and 3 that Joshua picks out. These two kings. It begins with Sihon, which was the king of the Amorites, as we saw there in verses 2 and 3. Sihon, over in Numbers 21, and we don't have time to flip over there, but this account is in Numbers 21. It's like halfway through the chapter, verses 20 through 32, something like that. But what happens was that Sihon led his army out to try to stop Israel from progressing through on their way to Canaan. Okay, try to get them before they got to Canaan. And they were defeated, as we saw, right? And after the victory, Moses' army quoted an Amorite type of Amorite, however you want to consider it, an Amorite war song. They took and quoted that war song. In that war song, it touted like an Amorite victory over the Moabites and their god of Shamash. Okay, so they stole their war cry, changed some of the words to reflect their own victory over Sihon. Rahab and the Gibeonites, right, mention that very thing, their victory over Sihon. Remember when Rahab talked to the spies, she said the people in Jericho were scared because of what? They knew what the Israelites were capable of, and she specifically references this moment here in which the Mosaic-led Israel defeated the Amorites, and then kind of that was one of the things she mentioned. Okay, so we get another mentioning of this. Joshua kind of brings this back from memory as well, because they would have, yes, the Israelites, would have known this account happened a little while ago now at this point, right? So that helps them to remember. It also reverts their attention back to the original conquering of Jericho, in which Rahab told them they're scared because this happened, right? So it kind of like, it's a reinforcement of a memory to remind them of what not only what God did, but then you can kind of layer that memory with what happened to Jericho and the walls coming down, so it reinforces, right, the fact that God is continuing to remain faithful to them. Not that he needed to or should have needed to, but again, this is motivational speech here, right, or a way to kind of continue the Israelites to remain faithful. The second king, of course, that was mentioned here, verse 4, is Og. Og was of Bashan. This account is in Numbers 21. verses 33 through 35, God assures Moses victory, and the Israelites defeats Og, of course, with God's help. And in that battle, accounts in Numbers 21, none of the Og's people survived. Not one of them. It was a total victory. And another reason, of course, that the Canaanites feared Israel, because all those people got wiped out. So these battles continue to prove to Israel and to us as the reader important throughout the conquest, because they show that Israel couldn't be stopped as they made their conquest to the Promised Land. It also shows that all that land that these heathenites were in actually belonged to God and his people, because he was able to take it over, right? Reubenites, Gadites, half the tribe of Manasseh that happened before, like we know back to our history here, Joshua, they were kind of already there, set up there on the other side of Jordan, and Joshua just wanted some of the men to come with him as they conquested, essentially became a home base for them. They took that from Sihon and Og in their inheritance, right? So Joshua is reinforcing memories here with successes that have happened, that God led Moses to defeat these kings. That's what we see there in those verses. Now, verses 7 through 24, we now get the list of the successes of Joshua. Okay. It's going to begin here with like a general outline of the land that the kings possessed at one time. And then there's this list that's obviously very long, very impressive. The author here kind of utilizes this list of his overall kind of like strategy and the narrative of the story here in Joshua to deliver a very powerful message of triumph, all right? So verses 7 and 8, first of all, these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel smote on the side of the Jordan on the west, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, even unto the Mount Halak that goeth up unto Seir, which Joshua gave unto the tribes of Israel for possession according to their division, the mountains, and in the valleys, and the plains, and the springs, and wilderness, and the south country, and the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. Okay, and then we get the list of kings. I do want to read this. Okay. Kind of like this, Bubba begat Bubba that Pastor Rob always mentions there. This is kind of similar, but I do want to go through this list because the whole reason for the book of Joshua is because of the conquering of the Promised Land, right? So I want to kind of go through and look through this long list here. And again, this list here, note as we read the list, there is not a list of kings that Israel lost to. This is an emphasis on what was possible when Israel put their faith in God and moved forward with the conquest. And then there's a few other things I want to talk about. So let's read this list first, starting there in verse 9 down to the rest of the chapter. King of Jericho, 1, the king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Jarmuth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormel, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. And the king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tappuah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hazor, 1. The king of Shimron Moron, 1. And the king of Ashraf, 1. The king of Taanach, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. The king of Kadesh, 1. The king of Jokneam of Carmel, 1. The king of Dor and the coast of Dor, 1. The king of nations of Gilgal, 1. The king of Tisra, 1. All the kings, 30 and 1. Right, so it's a list there of 31. Now, why would God not why would God not include the specific names of the kings? Preferring instead to list their cities and count them each as just one king. Like, why would God not include the actual names? He doesn't. We don't see the actual names of the kings, right? We see, for example, I'm looking at verse 16. This first one that pops up. We don't see the king of Makkedah named. We just see the king, and then it says after that, one, right? The king of Bethel, one. What's the reason there that God doesn't include their names, instead just the cities, and count them as one king? Any thoughts on that?
It doesn't matter who they are. And Israel is going to want a king, right?
Right.
That
Okay.
is named.
Right.
Maybe he's just saying earthly kings
Don't matter. Okay, good. That's a good reason. I don't have a good reason. I was just perhaps, maybe, right? Because the purpose of this conquest was primarily to take the what? The land, right? The conquest. The reason there is to take the promised land, and what represents the land? The cities do, right? That's how on a map, especially. You think about. If we look at a map of Europe, we don't look at France and say that Macron is the prime minister, right? We look at that and say that that's France, right? We don't, that's very just a way to list this, right? You can kind of understand the area. Probably, maybe is a good reason. Miranda's got a good point there too to show that it doesn't matter, right? God wants to take it, He's going to take it. All those things are a good possibility. God judged the Canaanites for their wickedness, right? This wasn't just God giving the Israelites the promised land. It was part of it, but it was a judgment on these Canaanites, right? We call them the Heathenites for a reason, right? Because they are doing all these other things, and they've also been kind of tough on the old Israelites when they had the opportunity, when they had the chance, right? The Canaanites were to be destroyed, wiped out. Completely gone while Israel's lived on in the territories the kings had once ruled, and the kings should have had the same fate. Who they were was of zero consequence as long as Israel continued to trust and obey God. Now, so there are 13 cities that's listed there. All right, there are 13 cities in this list that are not mentioned in. Excuse me, I said that wrongly. There are 13 cities recorded in the king list that aren't mentioned in these 12 chapters of Joshua. Okay, the presence of these cities on the list demonstrate that Joshua chapters 6, 8, 10, and 11, which are where these 13 cities are located at, are not intended to record every single detail of the battles that were won in conquest, right? We're getting snapshots of what happened. Okay, we're not getting the full story, right? We're not getting the full every kind of, I can't think of a good way to put it. They're not getting every little detailed analysis of what every battle that happened. Really cool if we got that, right? It would be neat to see what God did. And we know God throwed hailstones. It's hard telling what else God did to help them conquer these countries. We don't know. One, probably a lot more stuff to read, right? That's one of the reasons why it's probably there. Secondly, though, because it doesn't matter. Because God helped them do it, and that's the overall point of this, is that the faithfulness of God, that while they were faithful to God, this is why they were able to conquer as long as they were remaining to continuing to trust and obey Him. All right, Chad, bring up the next one now. So chapters 13 through 19 is the rest of this, and we see more opportunities through these chapters. Yeah, go ahead. You can stay on that one. More opportunities through these chapters for the Israelites and to remain and continue to be faithful in God. Okay. There's an instance there that we're going to look at in chapter 13 here, kind of specifically, that God promising once again to drive out and one of the enemies. Now, how long does this conquest of Canaan take? Does anybody know the time frame? We don't get a specific one, but this doesn't happen in a week, right? This is a process, okay, of them going through this. We don't get There's commentaries, things you can look at that kind of try to give you an estimate of how long this thing took and the time frame, but we don't get an exact time frame. But what we do know is just from a purely human standpoint of moving people around and resupplying people and conquering these places and moving by foot, right, all this doesn't happen overnight. This is a process. So Israel's military leaders are aging, right? They're continuing to get older as this goes on. And perhaps here the leader at the point of his life where kind of close to 100 or around 100, and we see that there in verse 1 of chapter 13. So I bring this up. Now Joshua was old and stricken in years. And the Lord said unto him, Thou art old and stricken in years. I mean, sometimes it's just, God just kind of gives you a good dose of reality, doesn't he? Joshua's old and stricken, and he just tells him, Joshua, guess what? You're getting old and stricken. And there remaineth yet a lot of work to do. Very much land to possess. Joshua ain't getting any younger. Hair's getting a little thinner, right? Skin's getting a little baggier, belly's getting a little bigger, whatever the case may be. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Joshua must have felt that at this point, as if he needed maybe another lifetime really to accomplish exactly what lay before him. God's going to call him home, like long before the work could actually be finished. But the notation here about Joshua being old shows that a good deal of time has elapsed, right, as this conquest was going on. That's the reason for there. God points out about much land needing to be possessed. Now, let's think for a second. First 12 chapters here. How much land hath Joshua and the Israelites conquered? Up until this point. Was consider, not consider chapter 13 for a second. Up until this point, how much land has Joshua and the Israelites conquered? Well, we know they did what to the southern kingdom, or southern part. They conquered it. And we know that a large portion of the northern kingdom at the end of chapter 11 was what? Conquered. And we just got this list in chapter 12 of 31 kings that had been what? Conquered. So why is there still more land? One, yes, it is, but it's not like infinitely huge. Why is there still a ton of work to do? Joshua's done a lot of conquering. They've beaten a lot of kings, 31 of them, not counting 13 cities that were mentioned in the first 11 chapters. Why is God behind Joshua when he's an old man saying, Joshua, you still got a lot of work to do, a lot of land to possess? What's the reasoning? Not necessarily. There's only a set amount of land in Canaan.
They did it completely.
Which means what?
They rebuilt.
So apparently, this is here so that we can look at this and say, apparently the Israelites had some setbacks. Right? Apparently at some point that there had to have been area that was controlled by Israel now no longer being controlled by Israel because they didn't remain faithful, or they didn't do what God had wanted them to do. How Israel had lost these territories, how Israel had lost control of some of these land, we don't see that recorded in Joshua, but we know it must have happened if the southern kingdom was conquered in chapter 10, most of the northern kingdom was conquered in chapter 11. We have the list of names in chapter 12, but yet Joshua, who's old and tired now, right? God comes to him like, hey, you got more conquering to do. This isn't an infinite amount of area. There are borders here in Canaan. So that means there had to have been setbacks. Israel had to have lost some of the land that God has given him. The principal reason for any loss, so that is a complete counter to how we started this lesson in chapter 12. We start off by saying that Israel and Joshua had been undefeated. The reasoning for their undefeatedness was what? Faithfulness in God. So on the counter of that, the reasoning for their defeatedness would be what? It'd have to be the opposite, right? Not faithful in God. So at some point between chapters 12 and 13, although we don't get it recorded, we don't know exactly how long, we know that Israel had to have messed some stuff up, stepped out of faith with God, and weren't doing what they were supposed to, because Joshua's going to have to go back. He's an old man now walking on a cane, the hair's falling out. He's got to go and lead him again, because God said there's a whole lot of work to be done. Because they didn't follow through on what they promised God they were going to follow through with. So Israel had to have not been walking in step with the Lord. Verse number 2. This is the land, and yet remaineth all of the borders of the Philistines in all of Geshurah. Let's read down there to verse number 7, sorry. From Sihor, which is before Egypt, even unto the borders of Ekron northward, which was counted to the Canaanite, 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gassathites, the Ashdothites, the Eshkelonites, the Gittites, the Ekronites, and also the Avites. From the south, but we can look at chapter 9 and 10, and we know that the entire southern region was what? We know it was conquered. We actually got to see that happen. So now, though, chapter 13, from the south, all of the land of the Canaanites and the Mira, that beside the Sidonians, unto Aphek, the border of the what? But we thought, what happened to the Amorites? They were defeated, but apparently they came back. Verse 5, in the land of the Gibeonites and all of Lebanon, we've heard that one before. Toward the sun rising from Baal Gad under Mount Hermon, we've heard that one before. Unto the entering into Hamath. All the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon unto Mizraphoth Maim and all of the Sidonians, them will I drive out from before the children of Israel. Only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee. Verse 7, thou therefore divide this land for the inheritance of the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. God was not okay. Go ahead, kid. Now bring up that next slide. God was not okay with just partial conquest. Right? That was not what he was okay with. And he was sure to remind Joshua that even though that Joshua, who was the leader that had allowed the Israelites to not fully conquer, right? Who's in charge of this mess? Joshua is. So when they didn't fully conquer, who's to blame? Yes. And now we got Joshua, who should be in retirement. He didn't do the job right the first time. So God's telling him to do what? Get off the fanny, right? We've got to go back to work because you didn't do it right the first time. Okay? God's not going to allow that to happen because the covenant says they're going to conquer all of it, right? They're going to possess all of it. So the goal had not changed, and that's what he's reminding him here. That just being in the land and having some of it, okay, being in the land and having some of it, as you can see here, that's not the goal. The end of the journey was possession of all of the land to the glory of God. By partial taking would bring tarnish to God's glory. All right? Verse 6 there. Inhabitants all the way down there to the audience. The second part of that, after the children of Israel, only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee. What would God do for the Israelites if they served him obediently and moved forward with the conquest? What's he going to do? Look above, children, sorry. And I will what? And he gives the Mizraphoth, whatever, the Sidonians, them will I do what? Drive them out. Right? If they're listening, if they remain faithful, obediently follow him, he's going to drive them out. Even in the midst, so God's promising them he's going to drive them out again in the midst of the fact that Israel had not done what the first time, drove them out. So in the midst of their failure, God is still promising and graciously upholding his end of the promise to fight for Israel. The next step, to divide the land up. Who had not done? Joshua. Why couldn't Joshua do it? Because he didn't own all the land. But Joshua was required to do what? Divide the land up. We saw that in the first chapter, first part of Joshua. He hadn't done it yet. So specifically, God commands Joshua to divide this land from an inheritance of the 9.5 tribes that were left. Okay? So this is an area here. This is Canaan. This is the extent of the conquest. Right? So these are the places that they don't have, right? We've got, Ashkelon, Ashdod. We saw all these names kind of pop up. This whole thing should be green. Right? But it's not, because they haven't done what they're supposed to do. So that tells you, and we know that from Jabesh Gilead, Shechem, right, Mount Gerizim, right there, if you just cut that in half and go all the way down, that's the southern kingdom. Yeah, for the most part, that's the southern kingdom. That we know was conquered already. Look how much of that has been lost and regained to these enemies because they haven't followed through and did what they're supposed to do. Go ahead, Chad. All right, so next week we'll pick up right here in verse number 8, which we'll see God dividing the land to the east of the Jordan. All right, God's going to review verses 8 down to about verse 30, what he's already done for the 2.5 tribes, and then moves forward on what they should be doing. So we'll get into that a little bit more next week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and time we can have to look in your word. We're thankful for it, for the lessons of it. I pray as we can get close to finishing this up, Lord, that we will be able to understand more and more just what you'd have for us. Pray for Pastor Rob as he comes here the next little bit as well. Keep us attentive to the word you have for him. So we pray. Amen. You all